And I think that's what we do on Seder night. We retell the trauma of what happened to us, but we do it in a way that gives meaning to the suffering and allows any Jew anywhere in the world, whether we're alone and isolated, we can tap into the collective resilience and destiny of Am Yisrael.
Where life takes a spin. Join the fun, let the talk begin.
Hello and welcome to Hakol Sababa. Today we have on our show Rabbi Michael Friedman, who is a wellness rabbi. He's a psychotherapist and somebody who knows a lot about trauma and counseling, and has just released a new Haggadah, the Healing Haggadah. So I'm going to turn the floor over to you and start out by telling us a bit about yourself. What's your background? How did you get into what you're doing? And go for it.
Perfect. Thanks so much for having me. It's a big honor to be on Hakol Sababa. I always enjoy schmoozing and speaking with you as well. To tell my story, I will have to go back to the 1800s. I'm not that old.
I was just about to say you wear it very well.
Thank you. I'm not that old, but it goes back. My great-great-grandparents came with Chovevei Tzion to Yerushalayim from Europe, different parts of Europe, and on both two sides actually. So on both on my father's side, my maternal and paternal great-great-grandparents came, and one of those families, the Friedman family, was one of 7 who were in Montefiore's shift out of the old city walls, the famous windmill in Yamin Moshe, Mishkanot Sha'ananim. So there were 7 families in this little unit. You could see them today if you go there. So my family was one of those 7 families.
Wow, are they on a plaque somewhere?
I'm looking for their names. As I came back, I'm searching. Maybe someone will let us just have some property over there also now, I'm wondering.
Were they called Friedman at the time?
There was a Friedman, and then there were other family members as well, other names too, but yes. And I go back actually also, my great-great-grandfather and beyond also had traditional smicha, rabbinic ordination, and so I am the 7th generation rabbi on my Friedman side, thank God.
Wow, impressive.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, so how do I get here? So I made Aliyah with my family 3.5 years ago.
From where?
Dallas, Texas.
Yeah.
Really wonderful community. They actually helped a lot in the sponsoring, co-sponsoring of the Healing Haggadah, which I'll speak about. I was originally from Washington, D.C. because my grandparents, who were born in Yerushalayim, both of my father's parents were born in Yerushalayim in 1910, 1911, of blessed memory. They ended up leaving before the inception of the state. So they left in the early 40s. My grandfather was a congregational rabbi in North Carolina for almost 3 decades, in Wilmington and then Asheville. There's a lot of reconstruction work happening in Asheville right now from the disasters over there. Yeah. And he was a congregational rabbi, and that was his dream. He studied in Yeshivas Mea Sharim in Yerushalayim, and my bubby was also a teacher and also a mentor for many of the ladies. And my Zaidi went around to everybody, Jews and non-Jews, even ecumenical work with pastors, and all around that North Carolina area. He was a shochet. He was, of course, he was the rabbi. He was also the Baal Tokeya. He was the chazan. He was a kohen, so he would do Pidyon Ben and other types of rituals, whatever you need, like the circuit rabbi. And then my father grew up and he hated everything to do with rabbinics, blessed memory. He was a preacher's kid or a rabbi's kid, and he said, I will never be a rabbi.
And then he became a rabbi.
And then he became a rabbi later in life. He was around almost 60 years old. He was studying and he was learning and he was teaching in Jewish education, and he formalized it when he was around 60, and he got smicha also as part of this chain.
Wow, 7 generations of rabbis.
That's right.
That's it.
And thank God we were able to close the circle of Aliyah a few years ago with my wife leading the charge, my wife being a very strong supporter of Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, and wellness, and here we are. Okay, so that's my rabbinic dream, and I was working in Dallas as a congregational rabbi, and I was working in a Jewish school, and also...
What congregation in Dallas?
It's called Congregation Shari Tefillah of Dallas. I was an assistant rabbi.
Okay, Shari Tefillah. I've been to Dallas, and I'm just trying to remember what the names of the shuls there. Just drop me a couple of names of the shuls.
Sure. So it's Congregation Shari Tefillah, and there was also Ohev Shalom. That's a little bit north, and then there's also Or HaTorah, And Rabbi Michael Citron, who you may know from the neighborhood here, from the Torah, he was affiliated with Shari Tefillah before me. And also he was one of the school, I think, principals, or maybe one of the directors of the Akiba Yavne High School, the strong modern Orthodox high school associated with Shari Tefillah, where I'm from.
Okay.
So that was my rabbinic dream, and then I became a psychotherapist while I was in Dallas. So I formally went back to school and studied to learn how to do individual therapy, crisis support, trauma.
So now I asked you this question earlier, but perhaps you can also explain for our listeners, like what is the difference between a psychotherapist and a psychologist?
Yeah, excellent question. And so there are 4 major ways of helping professionally in the US that I'm aware of, and at least the credentials that I know of. One is a clinical psychologist, someone really great who also helped with this work, and a good friend you may know, Dr. Ariel Hochster, you may know. He's a clinical psychologist. So he completed a PsyD, so either a PhD or a PsyD, and that's a level of training to have a doctorate, and those are the clinical psychologists. So I'm not a doctor, but I completed a master's program. And there are 3 master's programs, mainly in the U.S. that I know of, because I'm trained in the U.S. One is a licensed professional counselor, that's me, LPC. One is an LCSW, that's a licensed clinical social worker. The other one is an LMFT, licensed marriage and family therapist. So of those 3, they're all master's programs, they're all different letters. Each of them can do psychotherapy, but there are slight differences between each of the trainings, each of the exams, and each of the credentialing. One of the differences, social workers is more broadly known, especially in Israel. Israel recognizes the social degree. They don't recognize my degree at all, unfortunately, even though there's someone saying in the Knesset there's theoretically some parliamentary legislation in the works, but I won't hold my breath for 10 or 20 years on that one. But Israel, in terms of social work can be individual therapy, but that's not the only focus. Social work can also be something called case management, where people are going to be more of like a wraparound service, where they could be in someone's home, in a hospital setting, sometimes in a school setting. And the case management helps people connect to different resources across the communities to try to help them, whether it's low socioeconomic status or other types of dangers to themselves and others. Whereas the traditional psychotherapy really is just a catch-all word that we use for psychotherapy of just sitting and doing what we call therapy. It used to be in a couch for psychoanalysts. That's like the Freudian way, and that's a separate training, separate credentialing, a different process. Now it's much more of one-to-one, like we're sitting in chairs ourselves. The Freudians, by the way, now we're on this topic, the Freudians very much have a model of if I can speak for them, that became known as psychoanalysis, or sometimes psychodynamic, because it changed a little bit, hence the dynamic. That school of thought right now is very much, it used to be people actually had to lie on a couch because they thought you could elicit more feelings and self-insights if you're lying down and you don't really,
so
you don't
just
look
like
at
cartoons, that's a real thing.
It's a real thing, yeah. That's sort of the father of modern psychology was Freud. So he didn't, not totally the father, but what people would consider modern psychology. And that psychoanalysis, you have sort of the professional at a distance, and he or she is trying to help analyze what's coming up for the person on the couch. The other psychotherapy, most psychotherapy models who aren't in the Freudian camp, they kind of sit like us. It's more of considered to be equals, what they call a horizontal relationship rather than a vertical one. The vertical one is I'm up here and you're down here. And that's why actually they call it a shrink. That's actually how pejoratively they became a shrink, because the professional makes you feel like you have shrunk, like he or she is up here in this special place and you are the specimen. If I understand correctly for that term.
I did not know that. Now that is interesting.
Yes.
Okay.
So I was able to train as part of my dream to follow in the footsteps of Rabbi Dr. Abraham Twersky, who was able to combine a Torah background. He was a psychiatrist who was actually a medical doctor.
And whom my grandson is named after.
You're kidding? Oh, I did not know that. Oh, wow, that's very, very special. And I understand he was here in the community before I arrived. Also with Rabbi Myers and a little bit of the A.J. Twersky Learning Center, which is popping up around here. I volunteered to share some Torah with them and share some psychological insights. Much of my Haggadah and my life's work is really dedicated to this space, because I think he was really a pioneer, as you know, in the Jewish world, very courageous, spoke about topics that no one else did. He made psychological insights and overall holistic wellness, he made that not taboo. He made that part of the everyday speech.
Right. He broke down a lot of taboos.
100%. Especially also domestic violence,
yes,
family violence. Nobody was going to think about that. No one was talking about that. And if they were, it was hidden. And he put it on the table front and center. I had the privilege also of training with someone who worked with his daughter, Lisa Torsky, and continuing her work also in the realm of helping with family violence.
Mm-hmm.
So that brought me to the Healing Haggadah. A few years ago, I was taking a look at Pesach Seder and the Seder night, and what I was thinking as I was reviewing the rituals that we do, we've done for millennia, I started to think to myself, this feels almost exactly like trauma processing. The night, what we do on Seder night. So I divide it into 4 categories here, and it's actually based on Rabbi Rimon, who's also one of my Jewish heroes, who I had the privilege of handing a copy of the Healing Haggadah to just a few days ago. And hopefully when it's translated into Hebrew, he's going to help us distribute it for free or cost to chayalim, soldiers, and other people who can benefit from it here in Hebrew. So Rabbi Rimon breaks down the 15 steps of the Seder night. Kadesh, Shur, Chatz, what we have today, those 15 steps.
Well, the 15 steps is Dayenu. Right?
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know about that.
But Kadesh or Chatz is, that doesn't come to 15.
Well, it depends on how you count it. If you divide Motzi Matzah, then it's 15. You're right. Otherwise, it's 14. Or I guess you're saying Dayenu would be 15. Yeah, I'm pulling it up for you.
Okay, let's. I've gone blank on. Okay. So we've got Kadesh Uchatz Karpas Yachatz Magid Rachza Motzi Matzah Maro Korech Shulchan Orech Zafun Barech Halel Nirtza. So that's that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and then Halel and Nirtza make 15. Okay, I stand corrected.
Well, again, this was a matter of dispute also. Not everybody holds 15, and 15 is actually not essential for the Seder. Although I should point out 15 is a very interesting number in Jewish thought. I believe this is attributed to Rav Kook, that there were 15 steps in the Azara that go up, and 15...
And 50 Shir Amalot.
And 15 Shir Amalot, even better. I didn't include that, but I'll have to do that for the second edition, because that's excellent. It's also the Yud and the Hey of Hashem's name, and there are also 15 words of Birkat Kohanim when we do the priestly blessing. So 15 is definitely an auspicious number, but it's not essential to the Haggadah, actually, and it really goes back, Rabbi Yonah Klein, here of Ramat Beit Shemesh, pointed out to me that really the earliest source we have of these 14 or 15 go to Rashi's Machzor Vitri. So it doesn't even go back so far, in Jewish terms, 1,000 years is modern. And going back to the Mishnah of Pesachim, going back into the scholarly works of rabbinic tradition, we cull different sources to get to these steps. And Rabbi Rimon has a theory in his Haggadah, which I highly recommend for anyone, by the way, that they can be broken down into 4 categories. There are 4 main categories, of which all of these other 14 or 15 fall into. And the 4 categories, I think, mirror what I call holistic wellness. The holistic wellness of the mind, the heart, the body, and the neshama, the soul. So all of these levels of wellness, which is our organization Nafshi, or Nafshi Wellness, which means holistic wellness, try to unify...
Our organization.
The organization that I helped co-found, Nafshi Wellness, which was...
This is new information.
This is new.
You're injecting that as well. Just back up a second. Tell me about Nafshi.
This is totally new. When we were in America, we started Nafshi with the idea of combining Torah ideas with counseling psychology to enhance wellness. Exactly following in Rabbi Tversky's footsteps, Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Weinreb, Rabbi Dr. Weinreb, was our clinical and our spiritual advisor and our mentor, helped us launch. And we would do different programming with small groups, which had a Torah focus, and it had a clinical psychology focus. So we would have a small group, and we would have one facilitator for spiritual lens and one facilitator who was trained and licensed. So for instance, my wife led a group for infertility support for ladies called WOMBS. Women of Mind, Body, and Spirit. It's my wife's term. She coined it.
Okay, that's a great acronym. Cool.
Thank you. And basically, she brought together from our own personal experience of infertility and secondary infertility. She spoke about a tale of her own infertility and brought together 40 women. And they would go through spiritual texts for inspiration from the Imaot, from our holy matriarchs and different Torah sources of people who dealt with infertility on a spiritual lens. And we had a trained psychotherapist available as well on an emotional end. So what made our group Nafshi really unique is our small groups had both a spiritual component and a clinical counseling component as well together. That was one group. We also had Jewish meditation. We had the spirituality of yoga, Krav Maga, typical social and other educational programming. Then we made Aliyah, we came to Israel, and we started launching it in a little bit of a different way over here. Programs really focused on men's groups instead of women's groups only. And the men's groups were things about breaking habits, how to be more of a present parent. And then the Shmini Atzeret War, October 7th, began. And we shifted completely, and we just went to individual crisis support in the form of individual psychotherapy. We did also webinars we had hundreds of people in different hours and professionals. And we did a crisis hotline, and we tried to say, what publications can we put out that can help the people, the Am, in English and in Hebrew, to try to heal through the trauma that we're going through. And so the way Nafshi has evolved right now is, its main goal in promoting wellness in the Jewish world is to build strong, resilient Jews amidst the war and amidst their individual lives. And I took a look at the Pesach framework, and I said, I think what's been going on for thousands of years is this one night, the Seder night, has been the way that Jews have tapped into the collective destiny of the Jewish people. And so they turned their personal pain and suffering and trauma into something much, much bigger and created a much deeper meaning for the klal, for the whole country. And I think it's really needed right now.
So let's dive into that. I mean, what you're talking about, four categories, and
yes.
How does this play out in the
Yes, so I believe that going through Rabbi Ramon's category of the four different areas, the idea of the mind, the heart, the body, and the soul. So first we have Kadesh. So that starts off with the soul. That's Kiddush. That's where do we intend to go? What's the Jewish mission? What's the Jewish mission in the world? And the Jewish mission has to do with, I would say, our national mission is like what Shema would be our national mission. And what we say over and over in our daily recitation is Zecher L'Tziat Mitzrayim, that we're remembering the Passover Exodus. Why is that so central to our spiritual mission? Why is that? Why do we have that every single day? And I think part of what's built in into these four parts, and also broadly, is the story of the Jews for almost 4 millennia is a story of trauma. There's just no other way to see it. Like, trauma is built into our DNA. And it typified in the slavery in Egypt. That was the first national trauma that we experienced as a nation. Not a family or a tribe or a group of individuals, but as a nation, trauma is built into the system. For some reason, the way Hashem made the world, we have to go through that trauma. And if we have to go through that trauma, maybe there's something that can speak to us on an everyday level of what it means for our own individual traumas. And what I think emerges from all of this is that the national trauma that we go through and that we reenact on the Seder night is an ability to transcend it. I call it passing over trauma. It's a pun. It's meant to be a double entendre.
Yes, yeah, I got it.
Typically what we do in generations, Jews and non-Jews, that part of the human condition is we pass down trauma from one generation to the next. It's called collective trauma or intergenerational trauma.
There's a special word for that, epigenetic?
Exactly right, epigenetic. And it was a groundbreaking study in 2015 by Dr. Rachel Yehuda, whose sister is a colleague and a mentor psychotherapist here, Tali Rosenbaum, in our community. And her sister, Dr. Rachel Yehuda, had a famous study about 10 years ago that said exactly there's an epigenetic link, which is, if I understand it, there are cortisol levels that are measured in utero. So a baby who never experienced, specifically on Holocaust trauma, babies who were born after the Holocaust, who had no experience in terms of their environment or the nurture aspect, the nature versus nurture, they didn't experience the Holocaust, but nevertheless, there's some imprint that goes in what's called epigenetics, that they find that in utero, the trauma is passed down.
How does that reflect?
So for instance, I think that the trauma that we experience...
Because we've got some competition from outside.
I think that the trauma that Jews have experienced from the Holocaust, and even before this Holocaust, this was obviously the worst atrocity, I would say, in human history, is the Holocaust, the European Holocaust. But in my view, and I think this is borne out by history and research, it didn't differ so qualitatively from all the other attempted genocides of the Jewish people throughout our whole history. It differed in the in the quantity, in the scope, a third of the Jewish people actually had a genocide. It would make Haman very jealous that he was able to do it so successfully. And the precision and the depth, the enormity and the torture and the effect on the world, another 60 million people also. But in quality, this is the same pattern that Jews have had through crusades and inquisitions and attempts even by our enemies today, the Islamists of today who actually partnered with the Nazis, but go back to a mindset that it's not so exceptional throughout Jewish history. It's a long pattern. Yeah. So I think Jews, I could speak as an Ashkenazi Jew, but I think we have inherited trauma, including there's cultural trauma, and there's also in the epigenetics of our composition, and I would say our spiritual DNA, is we pass down trauma. And as a psychotherapist, what I work to do with people is we say stop. We want to break that chain of intergenerational trauma. And the Jewish people, I think, that's passing over. We want to pass over the trauma. We don't want to give it to the next generation. We want to transcend it, and we want to skip it like Pesach. We want to skip over the trauma. We don't want to pass that down anymore. And one of the ways I think you can see it manifesting right now, which I think has a tremendous impact on our ability to survive here as a nation. The way we fight wars, I believe, is a trauma response. We cannot seem to fight a war as a nation, and I believe this is due to our collective trauma of experiencing tyranny, oppression, and attempted genocide, is that we can't take certain steps to defend ourselves like every other nation in the history of war. Without exaggeration, as far as I know, there's never been a nation that's faced an existential war and a threat that has given food, fuel, electricity to its enemy population. It's never happened before.
Why is that fueled by the trauma? What makes that a response to trauma as opposed to, let's say, a response to a very real perception that the international community will sanction us if we don't do these things?
Well, I think both are correct, because I think the international community will. But the trauma response is, I don't deserve to be on the same level as every other nation. I don't deserve to conduct myself because of what's happened to me. I've come to psychologically accept my lower status.
Sort of a battered wife syndrome?
Exactly correct. That's exactly correct. This
explains Ashkenazim. What about Sfardim?
Well, that's a good question. So actually a very close look at at least recent history, and recent, the last hundreds of years, there has been an enormous amount of trauma from Arab countries specifically. And you can take a look at a great book called From Time Immemorial. Maybe you know about it, Joan Peters. She is a non-Jewish Westerner, set out to prove what terrible crimes the Jews have committed against the Arabs. And throughout her very extensive methodical research, this book came about 20 or 30 years ago, what she found was that Jews were Jews of ethnic Arab descent, we would say, or Sfardim, who lived in Arab countries for hundreds or thousands of years. They experienced systematic executions, persecutions, expulsions. A population you probably know, up to 800,000 or 1 million Sephardi Jews who were oppressed and kicked out of their lands over the last period of...
So they kind of take backstage because they never had a Holocaust.
Exactly right.
But life wasn't all strawberries. Wow.
Exactly right. I highly recommend also a documentary, also for your viewers and listeners, called The Mizrahi Project by my friend, Pastor Dumasani Washington, who is forging
who is a landsman of mine.
You're kidding.
He's a South African, no?
Oh, that's... not that. It's actually not the individual from the South African Parliament. If that's who you're...
This guy's not South African. Because the name Dumisani sounds very South African.
Okay, so it could be that he is from South Africa originally, but I know him from the States.
Okay.
But I think he does have connection to... There are individuals who are members of Parliament. It could be that I just don't know that he has South African roots.
Okay, maybe I'm wrong, and you can correct me in the comments.
I'll have to check. I didn't know that. I didn't know the etymology of Dumasani.
Yeah.
Is that... What language is that from?
It sounds kind of Zulu to me.
Okay.
I mean, I don't speak Zulu. But
you just know from
the
growing
sound
up.
of it sounds. That sounds South African.
Okay, makes sense. And he's a good friend, and He's a pastor from the U.S. He actually has a whole organization to join a Black Jewish alliance with, is a very faithful Christian, a Christian friend of Israel and the Jewish people, and he does a lot of work in that regard as well. He made a documentary, The Mizrahi Project, I believe is what it's called, and highly recommended. But yes, they say because they weren't put into ovens and put into ashes so that there wasn't the same trauma imprint for the Sephardim, but we can't really measure, even though I said it's the worst atrocity, the Holocaust, we really shouldn't, I shouldn't as a professional, try to measure one person's trauma or one group's trauma versus another, because they're really not comparable. Everyone's feelings are valid. And as part of what I think is going on over here is that one night of the year, or two nights outside of Israel, Jews could hone in on a vision for the future. They could hone in on, begin with the end in mind. That's the Kiddush of Pesach Seder, is what's this all for? We're not meant to stay in this lowly, degraded state outside of our land, outside of our deepest selves, in our dispersion. Exile, in my view, what is the word galut, or gola? What does it actually mean? What does it mean to be exiled?
Oh, you're asking for the root of gal.
Yeah.
Rolling.
Okay, rolling. So what's rolling? I think this is what I think is that the deepest exile is the exile of oneself, of one's identity. And I think over the last almost 2,000 years, we were like a national head that was severed from the national body. We were apart and separate, and we just got used to it, and we thought that's the way it should be. Now there's this coming back to the land of Israel in macrocosm, what we're doing is we are like reconnecting holistic wellness, which is what we say, nafshi wellness, the whole self, the whole head with the whole body, the farmers, the fighters, the people who are sweating and working and building an economy, and people in high tech. And what we're doing is, I think we're taking, with the study, with the Torah study, with our deepest spiritual inspiration, putting it all together. On Pesach, we didn't have that reality, we just had a dream of that. But in that dream, we said, okay, we have this trauma history, but you know what we have also? We have national resilience that we can tap into, going back from our earliest heroes of Moshe and Miriam, the ones who really faced the exile, and the deepest exile was the exile from within, not from without. And I think also this idea of, it's kind of interesting you say rolling, I was thinking dispersed. I was thinking that the little pieces are dispersed. The same thing happens from a psychotherapist lens. Even speak of trauma, it's very popular now, something called internal family systems, where they say there are different parts of a person. Well, one person's part is that I can feel very scared in one context, but I can feel very strong in another context. And I have parts within myself, in my system, my whole system battling myself. And I think that's happening in the Jewish world also. Our parts that have been dispersed all over the world are now coming back together, slowly, painfully. Of course, we're fractious, we're at each other. Of course, that happens when we're trying to integrate a real identity of what Israel is meant to be. And over the millennia, here we take all of the ways that a trauma therapist would help their client, and we do it on Seder night. Like what? So another thing that we do is we have food. We have certain things that we eat. What do we eat on Passover night?
Okay, we eat maror.
Maror, bitterness.
We eat matzah.
Matzah.
4 cups of wine.
Cups of wine. Amazing. Why do we have matzah? Isn't that, I'll just say, it's a little bit strange.
Well,
why? Yeah.
Hey, so should we go into the Haggadah? Matzah, why do we...
it's really strange, I would say. And this is also unique to Jewish history. We speak about our trauma. We do not forget it. We don't sugarcoat it. In fact, there's a special law that we have to start with the degradation. We have to start with the genut, with every way we were degraded. And there's a disagreement. Do we speak about it as physical slaves, avadim hayinu, or do we speak about it as we were idol worshippers, as spiritual slaves? Yeah. Both of them are different components in the Seder night, but that is a requirement. And the more we speak about the trauma, the more we're to be praised in the Seder methodology. Why? Other cultures, and in our lives also, we don't put on social media typically all of our mistakes, all of our losses, all of our failures. In world history, what we have is to the winner goes the winners write the history, and the historians write their win.
Or as Elon Musk says, that's only true if the losers don't have a lot of time and they can edit Wikipedia.
That's a good line. And over time, it's strange. It would seem strange, especially from on the surface, a psychological point of view, why we would advertise the trauma so heavily. I have to not just talk about it, we have to talk about it at length. There was a non-Jewish comedian who was talking about going to a Passover Seder for the first time. Everyone loves a Seder. Jews and non-Jews, we just love it. We're attracted to it. We want to experience it. And he says he came out and he was wondering, okay, there's some prayers, some chanting. Okay, now you bring out a little vegetable. Okay, the meal's finally here. And take one little bite. Okay, put it away. He's like, where's the first course? Where's the more talking? And there's more talking. The Jews just keep talking. All they're doing is talking. And hours are going by. And
singing.
And where's the meal? And it's a lot more funny when you hear the whole routine itself. But the point over here is we are speaking about the trauma. We are flipping the script. We're retelling it in a way that helps us have mastery over the experience that happened to us. And that's exactly what a trauma therapist does. Mm-hmm. When something terrible happens to a person, if they retell it, and they retell it with pain and degradation, then each time there's another wound. It's like I'm wounding myself again with the trauma memory. And in my brain, there's a neural pathway that's getting built that's saying, I'm a victim. It's happening again. I experience the terror of it again and again and again.
That doesn't sound healthy.
No, it sounds terrible. But if there's a therapeutic retelling, I can give it meaning. I can give it a new meaning. I can flip the script completely and say, these terrible things happened to me. And you know what I did? This is what I did in response to it. This is how I kept myself safe. Right. This is how I kept other people safe. This happened in a real case when there was a little girl that had, in the States, that had a break-in, and she was hiding, and while she was hiding, she was able to call the authorities, and she phoned the police, and they were able to come. And so she's traumatized by what happened to her, and of course we have this repeated throughout too many times in Jewish history, and up until today, where people are breaking in and trying to harm us. And part of the therapeutic retelling of the story was helping this little girl understand, look what you did. Those perpetrators, they didn't know who they were messing with. They broke into the wrong place because you were able to do something that they didn't know about, and you transformed yourself and kept yourself safe. So every time she retells the story, it's not that they're up here oppressing her, it's that she rose to the occasion and she accessed something within her, some strength and resilience that she didn't know that she had, and it flipped completely the dynamics.
The framing is very important.
Exactly. Now the neural pathway that's created in her mind is, I can handle whatever people come and throw at me. I can handle the most terrible danger, and I can teach others, and I can experience others. And I think that's what we do on Seder night. We retell the trauma of what happened to us, but we do it in a way that gives meaning to the suffering and allows any Jew anywhere in the world, whether we're alone and isolated, we can tap into the collective resilience and destiny of Am Yisrael.
Right, and that you actually headed off one of my questions that I've been preparing. I was thinking, okay, like we have this national epigenetic trauma built into us, and I was going to ask, like, is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? Because trauma is just a neutral. It's what you do with it that determines whether it's going to be good or bad for you. And some people go through a trauma and they just never recover, and some people go through a trauma and they become incredible people. I mean, let's go back to the Shoah and see, like, some people came out of the Shoah utterly broken, never recovered. Some people came out and said, if I survived, there's got to be a reason why Hashem chose me to survive, and they turned their lives into something incredible. And I think we've seen it in such a massive scale after October 7. It's the kind of resilience that we've seen from Israelis after this national catastrophe. We all run out of words to describe the horror of that day. And I mean, me personally, I was broken for weeks afterwards. I couldn't stop crying. I just couldn't hold myself together almost. And it was. And what really helped for me was to actually start getting up and volunteering and going to Cafe Aroma and making sandwiches and making in a small scale. I started making little podcasts, but it was just me sort of talking and venting.
I remember I saw them.
Yeah, so it was therapeutic for me, and I felt like I was having some sort of an impact and making a difference, and like going out to the army bases and doing a barbecue with L'man Achai and expressing our gratitude to the soldiers and encouraging them, and that was, for me, it was it was the least I could do, and it really wasn't that much, but it was something that helped me to cope with my own trauma.
Yes.
And I think if you look around at what the incredible stories about, I mean, you know the story of the diamond ring. There was a jeweler.
No.
I can't remember his name. There was a jeweler whose son was in the army, and he fell, I don't know if it was on October 7th or in battle shortly thereafter, and his son was about to get engaged, and he'd asked his father to make an engagement ring that he could give it to his girlfriend. And so the father had this ring, and he lost his son. And he said, well, look, I've got a ring here. And he put out word to the army and said, look, the first soldier who comes out of Gaza and wants to get engaged must get in touch with me. I've got a ring for him.
Wow.
So gets a call like the next day, said, is the ring available? And I said, yes, absolutely. Comes and gives it to the soldier, wishes him a mazel tov. He goes and gets engaged. Like next day, gets another call from a soldier, is the ring still available? And the father says, yes. And he makes another ring.
Wow.
To give to this soldier. And I don't remember the exact number. I think it was like 70 plus of soldiers who came out and said, I want to get engaged. And he made rings for every one of these soldiers.
Beautiful.
I was like, this is a superpower. It's mamish a superpower that we have, and from this epigenetic trauma that we have. But I think it's a good thing. It's a strengthening thing that we have as a people that we know actually, from having been through so much trauma and having dealt with so much trauma, we actually know how to deal with it.
Amen. Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more. And one of our hopes is that not only people who have this innate resilience, we don't really know why, from a research lens, why some people have more inner fortitude and resilience than others, but we do know that it can be trained, it can be cultivated.
Yeah.
And my new friend, Tal Hartuv, who was herself a survivor of a terrible attack in the Jerusalem forest some years ago, and who's been speaking across the Jewish world here and abroad about her own resilience and her own inspiration. And she wrote also her own memoirs about her experience surviving. And she said what she thinks is that we can export resilience to the world. That what the world needs and looks to us for all different things that we serve as a startup nation. She said the thing that's probably the most important, I agree with her, is exporting resilience and what we've been through. And this work also very inspired by Viktor Frankl, of course, who you were hinting to, of how we could respond during the Holocaust, of taking his suffering and giving it meaning and responding to it in a certain way as being part of his own process. And I agree with you, and I respect, I admire your feelings of being broken in those early days, and even now till today being still broken. This was very much an obsession that I had, being obsessed with anything I could do to try to help. And I truly hope that this English and also Hebrew edition will be of service to other people. Now they'll give me meaning in my own trauma healing as well.
Yeah, but tell us more. You started talking about the four
yeah.
different
So when I go,
stages.
yeah, thank you. I wanted to get to this. One of the second stages is the body, what I call the body stage. After we have the sanctification stage of the neshama, of the soul, I would say the body stage are all the things that we eat. So there are specific commandments, mitzvot, to eat on the Seder night. And we started about maror. So that's
Al-Kapras came first.
Yeah,
actually, no, Kiddush came first.
Ingesting, we're putting it inside of our body. And what I say, I think part of that idea of making Kiddush, of sanctifying, it's a unique combination of words, articulation, and this body feeling. Now, eating is going to be a very primal sense, maybe even the strongest primal drive that we have, and it's really one of relationship. It's a relationship that we have. We don't really see ingesting food as being so special in terms of a relationship with a higher being, with Hashem, but the truth is, I heard Rav Shimshon David Pincus, of blessed memory, he said, having food is actually the strongest way to have love and appreciation of our relationship with Hashem. Eating. We don't think of it that way.
Okay, that's a radical statement, actually.
It's a pretty radical statement on the surface. But if you think about it, what it is I'm getting life-giving nutrients in real time. If I don't have these life-giving nutrients, I can't live. And it obscures the lens for me because everyone else has food. Everyone else, or as a child, everyone gets food. So not only me, but my family, my siblings, my friends. So it obscures the actual care and love and warmth that go into my very being that keeps me alive in my relationship with myself and others and Hashem. But if one were to isolate it and think, well, the gratitude that is engendered and the life-giving nutrients really have nothing to do with anyone else in the world. If I really honed in on that, that can be a whole spiritual practice of empowering that relationship with Hashem.
Okay.
So much of the food on Seder night is reminding us of the bricks in the mortar, the charoset or the chazeret. So much of it is the bitterness you mentioned of the maror, the bitter herbs. Why are we doing this? The matzah even was considered to be poor man's bread. Lechem oni, or translated as bread of affliction. It was not a fancy bread.
And costs 100 and something shekels a box. And that's it.
Yeah, it's a great market inflation now, that's true. But in antiquity, it was considered the peasant's bread. It was considered the very poor. Okay, I guess the demand right now is such that it makes the price go up. But looking at people who
or maybe it's referring to you after you've bought it.
The impact, the impoverish my wallet.
Sorry, I broke your train of thought.
Yeah, no,
there.
it's okay. But I think what's going on is we are eating the trauma. We are ingesting the trauma. We're saying we have a mastery over what happened to us. We can re-experience it. We're meant to re-experience it. The night is one of reenactment. We're meant to put ourselves right back into the moments of slavery and all the moments of trauma and oppression throughout the years, including today. And we're going back and we're saying, we took, exactly as Jews do throughout all of their experience with cultures throughout civilization. We encounter other cultures, they try to oppress us and destroy us, but we end up eating them. We chew them up, their ideas, and hopefully we take the best and hopefully we discard the bad parts of them and not vice versa. But what we do is we encounter different societies and cultures and we chew them up and we take the best, we contribute to them, they contribute to us, we assimilate them in a positive sense, not in a pejorative sense, and then we discard them and they go into the dustbin of history and they are gone and we move on. That's a process, an evolutionary process throughout the world. And I think we do the same exact thing. We eat the trauma. We take everything, the best punch that they had against us, we take it and we incorporate it as part of making us stronger.
Okay, and that's an interesting thing. While you're talking, I was just thinking that it's an interesting combination that like as we're ingesting the trauma. So starting off with the matzah, the poor man's bread, the maror, the bitterness.
Yes.
We take that in, but also an equal part of the whole Seder night is Shulchan Aruch, that you're supposed to have a Yom Tov meal and say, okay, now we're done with the trauma. Now it's time to have a proper meal and feel like kings.
Excellent. Excellent point. Yeah, that's also a very integral part of this. I agree. And that's, I think, leaning. I mean, there are different reasons why we say we lean, but the one that speaks to me is that that's how royalty ate in antiquity. They leaned.
Yeah.
And so when we are recreating our experience, it's not just we start off with the trauma, which other cultures avoid and don't include in their national histories. We not only include it, we emphasize it, we scream it, we talk all about at length about all the terrible things that happened to us, and then how have we emerged through Hashem's help? And we emerge, as you said, couldn't have said it better, as nobility, as royalty. I have so much so I have to take my body, and this is another part of trauma processing, is body expressions. There's a culinary experience, and then there's also a kinesthetic experience. When I point to things, I have to point to Pesach Matzah Maror. They even have a strange custom. The kids grab matzot from each other. They have to steal. That's a very strange thing. That we inculcating stealing. Why are we doing that? Yeah. And I heard from Rabbi Yochanan Zweig, the great Rosh Hashiva in the U.S. in Florida, who was kind enough also to write a letter of bracha for this book, that he thinks the reason why we teach kids to chotfim, to grab the matzot from each other, because kids don't have a sense of ownership. When they have something, it really means a lot to them. And when someone can come and take it, it's reliving the slave experience. Because in slavery, if we were all slaves to one master, like Paro, the Pharaoh, then any Jew could take possessions from any other Jew. Kids hate it when you just take their toy. It's like, that's part of me. Adults hate it too.
Yeah, a kid can be konabi, can't be makne. Oh,
excellent. Excellent. And over here, when you take it away from a child, when their matzah is taken away, they're like, hey, this is a terrible experience. You're helping the child actually relive the slave experience too. The afikomen you have to break it. It's a broken matzah. So we do all these physical things. There's a brokenness. The the broken matzah on the inside, the yachats that we're doing, it's like we are elevating the brokenness inside of ourselves. Everyone is carrying a little brokenness inside of us, especially with what's happening now in the world, but also in our everyday lives. And I think what we do is with the culinary experience, with the kinesthetic experience, with the therapeutic retelling, we are going through all the ways a trauma therapist. So this is not a replacement, by the way, for trauma therapy. I highly want to emphasize that everyone should actually see a professional if they need to, and they can gain from, and I think they can. But we are simulating the therapeutic experience, and I think that was what the Chachamim, the sages of antiquity in our tradition, had in mind for this night.
Okay, so did we go through have we gone through all of your 4 stages? Just say them out again. What are your 4 stages in summary?
Sure, we have the Kiddush or Kadesh, which is the spiritual aspect. That's the first cup. We have 4 cups, and we have 4 stages. We also have the Magid part, which is the intellectual, or I call it neural pathway creation, assigning meaning, creating new meaning. That's the articulation, that we create a deeper sense of consciousness the more we articulate.
Because and they match to the 4 cups, okay.
They match to the 4 cups, that's right. Then there are the mitzvot to eat, so the body experience, the physical experience, when I pick things up, when I point to them, I'm simulating. That's what I call culinary and kinesthetic. That's the body. Those are all the mitzvot to eat, or the 3rd cup. And then the 4th cup.
And that also includes the Shulchan Aruch, where you're sitting and having your Suda and benching.
Exactly right. And then the last one is Hallel, and that's music and song. And that's, as we say, music is the language of the soul. Wow. And I think that's emotional relationship with Hashem, emotional healing. So many songs have come out in Israeli society since October 7th.
Yes.
Songs of triumph, songs of hope. You can't help but feel the songs. That's what Nirtza was historically. Historically, all those songs in the back of the Haggadah have been added over hundreds of years across cultures. It's our response, our resilience response to the terrible things that happen to us, and they just get incorporated into Nirtza throughout. All those extra songs.
So you reckon like this year we should add on Amishal Giborei Al to
100%
to the back of the Haggadah?
Yeah, Odio Tertov. It is going to get better. 100%.
I mean, I personally detest that tune, but
thanks for sharing. You're in trouble though, because it's everywhere. You got to close your ears.
I know. Like you've seen all these memes going around where like the woman comes in and she sees the old gramophone player, and she puts on the music and and she picks us up and just smashes the thing. It's like, that's me. That's me.
I didn't see that, but that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and I also translate Nirtza with a little bit of poetic license as acceptance, because part of one's traversing trauma and transcending trauma is accepting that I can't change it. I wish I could change it. I wish I could turn back the clock. People experience that in terms of grief. That one of the stages of grief, the famous stages, which Kubler-Ross, the famous therapist and researcher and author, was saying, are the 5 stages of grief, which of course are not. She also said subsequently that they're not linear, so it doesn't mean people have to go through the stages one by one, and they don't even have to experience all 5. Everyone grieves differently. Everyone copes differently. Emotionally, this is true. But one of those stages is called bargaining, and bargaining is sometimes in my mind. It's, if only I would have gone here, then I wouldn't have had this terrible accident. If only I would have stopped my son or my daughter from going to the Nova Festival. And I'm bargaining really with myself, and I can't ever resolve it. And it cycles, and I add pain, and it's a deeper wound each time. That's what the bargaining stage would be.
Why is that called bargaining?
Because I'm trying to negotiate with myself what I could have done differently, and I'm blaming myself that I...
But I mean, that would more approprially be called blaming. Self-blame.
Yes, you're correct.
Bargaining sounds like, when I first heard that term, I think like, it's somebody who's like, in a situation where they're in their life is in danger, and say, please God, if you'll save me, I'll take on keeping Shabbos or whatever. That sounds like a bargaining thing. Right.
Yeah, you're right. It would be more aptly be referred to as blaming. But here, these steps get applied or they get misapplied to all different crises, which is really only speaking about coping with grief and loss. So it's only after the event has taken place that really she made her research, even though it's been expanded. Right. But yes.
Total tangent.
Sure.
But I had a theory that these stages of grief were enacted in Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody.
How so? I'd love to hear it.
take me take me through what your 5 stages are, because I don't remember them offhand, but I just remember when I once read about them and I looked at Bohemian Rhapsody, and I wonder if that's why it became such a wildly popular song.
Okay, I have to look also to try to remember all 5 of them.
Okay.
But nothing really matters to me.
Yeah, that's your end. Your end. That's your end. That's your acceptance.
Powerful. Mm-hmm. Well, he was also wasn't the
Freddie Mercury.
He was dying.
No, not when he wrote that.
It was before?
No, long before he got AIDS. Yeah.
Okay, because I'm not an expert.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert in this band, nor am I an expert in him personally. But I do believe "The Show Must Go On" was written after he was diagnosed.
That was one of his last. That was one of his last.
And
songs.
so that probably was. So over here, it's going to say denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. 5 stages of grief, Kubler-Ross model. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I believe you going into.
Yeah, I'm not going to it's a bit too much of a digression for this
Sure.
for this moment, but it just struck me that there seemed to be a strong parallel between the two.
Yeah, fascinating. Definitely fascinating. Yeah. And over here, I think as we walk through the steps, the acceptance at the end is I can't change what happened, no matter how much I would want to, and who isn't blaming themselves to some degree, and when tragedy strikes. As you said, there's an element of self-blame, but the nirtza is accepting that this occurred without having to know the reason.
And I think etymologically you're right, because ritzui is it's exactly what the meaning is. It's the mollification, I guess, is where you just this is accepted. It's it sounds about right.
I think so.
So I mean, I want to just dwell a little longer. We've got, I know you've got limited time, but you're a specialist in trauma, and I want to come back to the point of whether it's a national trauma or a personal trauma. So I'm going to say again what we've been saying is that we're seeing that the Pesach, the whole Seder Pesach, as a therapy, as like a group therapy for our national trauma. And on the one hand, we don't want to dwell in trauma, but on the other hand, we want to we evoke it every time. We re-evoke that trauma, and as a form of immunization.
Yes, exactly correct. The same way I would say when I do exposure therapy with people. Let's say someone has a tremendous fear and the person is stuck. It happens with phobias in a way. There's certain types of exposure therapies, which you're probably familiar. So if someone is terribly afraid of being on a mirpesset outside on a balcony, so we therapeutically hold their hand and expose them to that danger and that threat. So what happens is they're still terrified. We still evoke the same body response, and sometimes that's perspiration, rapid heart, sometimes it's pains in the stomach, could be headaches. Those physiological processes will still happen, and we want them to. But but the story that the person tells him or herself is different. It's that I can survive the worst onslaught of these body functions in my fear. I can do it, I can survive it. So it went from harmful distress, we've transformed into helpful distress. We want so much, I want so much to just stop the pain, just prevent the pain from happening. And I want that for my kids, who I treasure, and for the Jewish people and the world. And I just wish in vain that I could take away the pain. But that's not the human experience. I cannot take away the pain. I can't even protect and shield my own children from the pain that they experience in life. Instead, it's a different way of viewing it. The way of viewing it is, I'm going to walk with you throughout the pain, and I'm going to give you the strength through encouragement and hope, and specific, if it's professionally, it's through therapeutic processes. It's not to be attempted without a professional. And I'm going to help you, walk you through that terrible distress so that you know you're going to come out stronger at the end of it. So then the distress, instead of being harmful, is helpful distress.
Right. So trauma is, again, to say that again, we've said it earlier, but trauma itself is not a bad thing. It's entirely what you do with it.
Well, I wouldn't want anyone. Want anyone to experience.
You don't lichatchila go looking for trauma, but it's just everyone in their life at some point is going to go through trauma multiple times, and what we need to do is build up that resilience to trauma. This was a difficult balance that I personally was having, at the beginning of the war, because I had been so overwhelmingly, I've been so overwhelmed with trauma from, reading and I don't know, I've just got a very strongly developed empathy. Which in this particular case was very much to my detriment, because it's like absolutely paralyzed me. I was so broken from just reading and hearing and the horrors that came out on that day.
Yes.
To the point where I actually physically had to cut myself off from all news.
Yes.
And for me, that was obviously the right thing to do, because every time I looked at another story, it just took me further down.
Yes, I totally agree with you, and I encourage people also not to engage in re-traumatization.
Yeah.
Exactly. And by the way, your sensitivity inside your soul and what comes out in you is one of the reasons why I'm drawn to you, one of the reasons why I approached you, and one of the reasons why I respect you and admire you. And I feel similar. It can be very, very hard. And this is what our colleagues would call trauma with a lowercase t versus trauma with an uppercase t. So they're going to be all different. It's sort of a catch-all word that people use. Medical professionals use it. Dentists use it. You had blunt trauma to the teeth, where there's going to be a physical wound. Here we're talking about something deeper.
That sounds like the Russia.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, that's exactly right. And speaking of the Russia, there's a fascinating exposition here, which I quote from a great mentor, a Rebbe of mine, Rabbi Teichman.
Tell me again about Rabbi Teichman.
Yeah, Rabbi Teichman has an essay about the Arba Banim, the 4 sons, and his thesis I incorporated here also for the Russia, because it says that we blunt their teeth. It's not exactly strike their teeth, it's blunt the teeth. What does that mean exactly? What's that possibly meant to mean? And his theory, which would fit the reenactment that we're describing here about the Seder night processing trauma, is that to the Rasha, to the person who's wicked, if we could even call someone Jewish nowadays who's at the Seder table wicked, what we say is appeal to their culinary palate. Blunt their teeth means take the person who is totally disengaged, who is antagonistic, and say to them, what you're about to experience is something that is going to taste so sweet. It's going to taste so great to join yourself with the destiny of the Jewish nation. We want you to be a part of it. If you don't do it, if you leave yourself out, you wouldn't have been redeemed because you take yourself apart. But appeal to his culinary palate. That means practically, what does that mean? Like invite someone over for a Shabbat dinner. Let them taste how sweet it is to be part of the Jewish people. We hear all about it's terrible to be the Jews. Everyone hates the Jews. Such guilt we inherit. All of that stuff, right? We feel it. A lot of Jews feel it, and it's too heavy. Rabbi Teichman says, "Haket shinab" for the Russia. Blunt the teeth means appeal to their culinary palate. Let them taste all of the sweetness of what it means to emerge from the trauma and to be united and together in love and care and joy on Passover night and beyond.
It's interesting. I mean, it's a very stretched interpretation of hake. Hake. How does that come to be? Like feed him, or
well, what is blunt in English? What is hake actually? Because it's a kuf, it's not a chaf.
Kuf, yes.
It's a kuf. So the question is, what is the meaning of that at all?
So it's in the Mishnah, where I think it was Rabbi Yeshua was like heard this opinion, and he was like he didn't like the idea, but it was like okay, he sort of gritted his teeth about it.
It's like a gritting of the teeth. Interesting. So it's
it's not a common word, so it's not easy to find a good.
Definitely, point well taken. I think what's even more fascinating, I would say, adding on to this, is the word for tooth in Hebrew is shen or shin,
shin.
Right? So it's like the leather shin actually looks like a tooth. And this is heard from Rav Yoel Rakowski of the Old City. And you said when you take 2 teeth, vishinantam, it's the same idea conceptually. We say when we chew on an idea. Just like we're talking about chewing on different cultures and concepts. When we chew an idea, what do we think when we say it's food for thought? Or vishinantam levanecha, and you shall teach. It's teach, but it's sharpen, it's slice, it's digest. It really adds to this idea of holistically and in a body way making it a part of myself. That's really the vishinantam. And he even says a cute way in English, say, chewing is tshuva. And we know if a person really, and this goes into holistic wellness, literally, if a person chews very quickly, first of all, the Chachamim talk about chewing slowly as actually a segula for long life. They talk about eating slowly. But it may not be something magical or mystical. It may just be when I'm more mindful of the food that I ingest, then, and I'm putting in nutrients in my body that are not fast food, right? Food that breaks down very quickly. If I slow everything down, so I have slow nutrients, I have slow spiritual sustenance, I have mindful eating, and I have mindful processing of ideas. Even as I'm saying it, I'm trying to consciously slow my words down also. Sometimes we can go so fast with the chaotic pace of life. So I'm trying to be more mindful myself.
Right.
When I consciously slow it down, that can be an aspect of teshuvah, the idea of chewing on something slowly. Of course, you can see this parallel too with Esav, how quickly he wanted to ingest without chewing.
Right. Halitzeni now. Glug, glug, glug.
Exactly right. So the parallels go very deep and very wide.
Very, very interesting, yeah.
Thank you. And I'd say the international scholar that talks about trauma in the body is Bessel van der Kolk. He's a Philo-Semite, a great friend of the Jewish people.
Yeah.
Gave a lot of webinars to Jewish communities after October 7th initially. And basically he wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score. And this is very popular.
Yes, I remember
You
that.
heard of it?
I've heard of the name of the book. I didn't.
Right. The book is considered like the Bible of trauma he and some other of his colleagues over the last 20, 30 years. He says that trauma goes in the body. And the idea that time heals all wounds is not true when it comes to an emotional trauma. A physical trauma, we know it heals. But an emotional trauma that we're discussing are the wounds that leave an imprint. The imprint goes in the body. And if I don't process it in some way, sometimes it's talk therapy, like I do in psychotherapy. Sometimes it's massage. Sometimes it can be yoga. It can be meditation. It can be physically working the trauma out, consciously working it out. And he proves this with research and especially beneficial clinical outcomes following September 11th about people who engaged in things like acupuncture. They had similar modes of healing than the people who did talk therapy after September 11th. And so he proves this all with tremendous research, as you probably know from the book. But if a person says just time heals all wounds, it's not true with the invisible trauma imprint. A person can go a year, 10 years, 80 years later, that trauma is still there.
Why is it so different in the mind as opposed to the body? The body just, you cut yourself, heals, moves on.
That's a great question. I don't know the answer. But what the research shows is that there's a mind-body connection. That's part of why the story that we retell ourselves can have a body transformation simply by creating new neural pathways in the speech that we tell Magid of our story. And just like individuals tell their trauma story, that has a physical manifestation in the body healing. Why it happens, I'm not sure.
And it's like suddenly like this idea pops into my head that like if this is following on with your thesis that the Pesach Seder is like a sort of a national healing, a national binding, and a national recommitment to our purpose. It kind of makes sense now why Korban Pesach is one of only two mitzvahs aseh that has a penalty of kares for not doing it.
Beautiful.
It cuts you off. It's like if you're menutak, you're separated from the Jewish people if you don't do it.
Excellent point. I have to add that for the next edition. It's excellent.
You see, now you should have come to me before when you're writing this. I would have
That's right. what I will share about it too is that there's that communal aspect of it too, right? V'shachatu oso. It's done in a group, so many people can join together in one national mitzvah. It can be one for many, and then the ones who did it
has to be. You've got to make it somewhere because you've got an entire animal and you're not allowed to leave any of it over. So find me the guy who's going to eat the entire goat.
Exactly right. And that's why the Passover has been so family-oriented and community-oriented over the years, so much so that when people were alone during the very first month or two of COVID 4 years ago, hopefully we'll all forget about this, but some of the greatest pain and suffering were when people were alone. Not because they contracted the virus, but because they were mandated to be alone, often in a draconian way, as you probably remember. But that suffering of being disconnected from the klal, from the large or portion of the nation of Israel, or even their family units in smaller systems, that created more suffering than almost anything else. It's specifically tying to the group. So even if I show up in my Seder without any of the insights here from counseling psychology and the wisdom of our sages throughout millennia, even without any of that, simply the act of being together with others in the pain, that's Imo Anochi V'tzara, that's Hashem says, I'm going to walk with you in the pain. That's when Moshe came down and it says, Natan Einav V'libo, he set his eyes, like you did after October 7th, and all of us do in our own micro ways. He put his eyes and his heart with empathy to the suffering that people had, and we say that's In the language of the Chachamim, noseva olim chaveiro. I lessen the load simply by being in the pain with somebody else. I can lessen that physical burden.
Wow, that's great. So if somebody wants to get hold of this book, where can they get hold of it?
They can get a hold of it on Mosaica. Mosaica Press is the publisher, mosaica.com, I believe.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
If not,
That's, I think or is it mosaicapress.com?
Could be mosaicapress.com, thank you.
So.
And that should be available shortly, if it's not already up for pre-order. And Feldheim is distributing. Anywhere Jewish books are sold, hopefully here in Israel and also abroad. And after Purim time, I'm told also on Amazon it will be available for distribution before Passover.
Yeah, it's mosaicapress.com. Okay. Very good. Hatzlacha Rabba.
Amen. Thank you. It was a great privilege and pleasure.
We could have chatted for a lot longer.
So let's do it. I'll come back. I'd love
to
come
back another time.
I would be honored.
Okay, that'd
Thank
be
you.
great.
Thanks so much.
Okay, thanks so much. Hatzlacha Rabba.
Give you a hug.
Yeah, cool.
Hako, Sababa, where life takes a spin. Join the fun, let the talk begin. Hako, Sababa, where life takes a spin. Join the fun, let the talk begin.